Hello, my name is Josh Diaz, and with me today is author Christine Nykoluk, who is releasing a new book, Heartstones, which will soon be available for purchase. Christine, how are you?
I'm great. I'm here in Canmore and we're just waiting for some snow. Things have melted quite a bit, and we're expecting some family visiting this week. So we'd love it to snow for them.
So, Christine, could you tell me a little more about yourself?
Well, I'm retired and I grew up in Manitoba. And shortly after that, I came to Alberta and I worked here for um, about 8 years, and I went to university here. And after university, I moved to Saskatchewan and I worked as a grazing management specialist for 22 years. So I retired in 2012 and find myself back here in Alberta. I've lived across the prairies. I've lived in all the provinces, Quebec West. So I was a grazing management specialist for an organization called the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, and so I um, I worked with community pasture staff and other partners in prairie conservation. So, and as part of that, I did a lot of writing. That's a little bit about me.
So, how long have you been an author?
An author, let's see, this is my debut book. This is my first book, but it depends how you define an author. Like I've been writing for about 30 years.
You say you've been writing for 30 years. Has that also been in a book writing capacity, or what do you mean when you say you've been writing for 30 years?
Great question. When I started working for PFRA, there was a need for somebody to write, to translate science into everyday language so that managers on the ground could use this information. And so I developed a newsletter that ran for 20 years. I did any kind of writing that my organization needed me to do. So I was writing in my subject matter expertise, you could say.
And this new book that you are releasing, this is also an area of which you are also very familiar with. Could you tell me what is your new book, Heartstones, about?
Well, after I retired, I had a bit more time to think about um, my ancestry and where I came from, and I became very curious about where my home village in Ukraine was. And I started asking my family questions, and it turned out that my sister had collected a number of stories from an aunt of mine who remembered dates and all kinds of details. So um, it all started from there. And anybody who's done genealogy research knows that you can really go down a rabbit hole when you start doing these kinds of investigations. And my research led me to write a document for my family on our ancestry. And that document actually resulted in a really nice reunion in 2016 where a number of family members got together and we shared stories, and even more stories evolved. So I read anything to do with World War I and Ukrainian culture and events during that time.
Well, that's lovely. Would you be able to tell me what genre would you say that your new book is from someone who's not familiar with historical writing?
Okay, this would be called historical fiction. My book contains a lot of real historical events, but because I wasn't there, I had to develop a lot of content to fill in the blanks. It became a work of fiction, and of course, historical fiction.
Your new book, Heartstones, focuses a lot about the Ukrainian story, and you yourself have ancestors from Ukraine. Could you tell me more about that?
Yes, my grandmother and my grandfather came from Ukraine. Their ancestral village, my ancestral village, is Melnitsa Podilska, which is along the Dniester River, which is by Moldova. And my grandfather came to Canada in 1914, just a couple of months before World War I was declared. And interestingly, about a month after his second uh, child was born. So he stayed in Ukraine for the birth of that child, and then he left for Canada, planning to work on the railway. And with the end goal of buying a farm from him for himself. And my grandmother she grew up in a little village just near Melnitsa Podilska. And so they're my grandparents. I am second generation Ukrainian on my dad's side. My mom is Polish, but so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I don't speak Ukrainian. My That wasn't something that was passed down to me, but certain customs and beliefs were passed down, and so that's my Ukrainian background.
Of course, you have a lot of history with this subject matter, and you were able to source a lot of real facts and information about the topic. But what really sparked your idea to write this book?
I remember my dad telling me these stories, but it took me many years to really understand what they meant. When I realized that my grandparents had been separated for 9 years during World War One. I thought that was quite shocking, and that would be really quite unusual today. And how many people would wait for their partner for 9 years in a time when communication was really limited? It would be very difficult. And indeed, many immigrants who lost contact with their families kind of moved on and never were able to successfully reconnect again. So I thought that was amazing. That was really amazing. And one of the things I remember my dad saying is that when you marry somebody, you stay married forever. And I thought, wow, that he must have got that from his parents. That strong belief that once you're married, you're married forever.
You did mention that this book you had to do a fair bit of filling in the blanks. Would you be able to tell me how much of this book is direct fact and how much did you have to fill in as fiction?
I would say that all the key events, or most of the key events, are derived from real story. I've used a lot of dialogue in the book, and once you start using dialogue in a book, it does become fiction. So in my research, I also read stories of many other Ukrainians during this time period. So I'd like to say that any of the fill-in stories actually happened to somebody, a Ukrainian in modern day Ukraine or in Canada.
I'd like to know, as you were writing the book and processing all of these stories from your family and from other families that you had done the research for, did you know necessarily how the book and the story of the book was going to unfold, or was it more a surprise to you when you reached the final pages, the final chapters?
That's a really interesting question. When I read books about how to write, and one of the authors suggested that your book needs to really contain three key events. You need to determine what the beginning event is going to be, the middle, and the ending event. And so I knew that the book would start with my grandfather or my character leaving Ukraine to immigrate to Canada just before World War One. And then I knew it would end with them reuniting in Canada after the war and after Canada reopened its borders to Ukrainians. And I knew what the middle event would be, but I won't divulge what that is. And so that is kind of how an engaging book can be structured. And I didn't know how to tell the story of the reunification at the end of the war, but I was on a hiking trip with my husband, and I told him about the difficulty I was having finishing my book off, and he quickly ran off three different scenarios that I could use, and I ended up using one of his scenarios, which I thought was really cool. He had a really great idea because he was familiar with the book. He had read the draft, and I really liked the way the book ended. And other people seemed to enjoy it too.
When it came to writing your book, how did you deal with perhaps the more serious and somber aspects of your history and general Ukrainian history?
Well, there are really difficult parts of Ukrainian history, and I have read books that come across really dark, and I really didn't want to do that. I wanted there to be some happiness and joy in the novel. I didn't want it to be really dark, but nonetheless, I had to address these difficult scenes. So how I approach them is to first get them down on paper, and I kind of did a lot of other reading to see how other people handled some of these difficult scenes, and then I shared it with my writing critique group and got their opinion. Like, does this seem real? Is it difficult enough, or is it too difficult? And there's a saying that goes, if you don't cry when you write these scenes, your reader certainly won't cry. And if you want to engage your reader in an emotional way, um, it is good to share these difficult scenes as well. I don't think people want to read a happy, a book that's just full of happiness, because um, that doesn't engage them as much. And also, Ukrainian history has a lot of difficult content in it because of its geopolitical position.
I want to know, why did you feel more or less obligated when writing the book to find a striking balance of the, as you put it, the happy and the more negative aspects of, or the more somber aspects of Ukrainian history? Why did you feel you were personally obligated to strike that balance and not lean either way in terms of your personal preference?
The history of Ukraine is not happy, 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 and I don't want it. I don't know if it was black, 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 but I felt I had to explore the difficult topics because I really got involved in investigating what would be the emotional feelings of my grandparents when they were going through this. Um, how would they base their decision? What would they be thinking? And so I kind of did a deep dive into what it would be like to be involved in this experience, and of course those difficult experiences also shape them as people, and and who knows, maybe that has intergenerational effects as well. So yeah, I wanted to write, I wanted to bring history to life for people, for Ukrainians and other readers. What went on? How would you feel? What kind of decisions would you have to make if you were in this position? So, yeah, helping history to come alive.
Just reading my notes in front of me, I have that the Kirkus review said about Heartstones that it is historically rich, that you skillfully wove in vivid elements of Ukrainian customs and history, and that Heartstones is a poignant work with disturbing relevance to today's battle for Ukrainian democracy. Now, how do those quotes strike you?
I I really I'm really humbled and pleased that that's what the reader picked up, because as I mentioned before, I did a lot of historical research, and I like that they responded by feeling it was historically rich, and that, like, I even researched Ukrainian customs and superstitions and cooking and all that kind of thing. And I used Dr. Michael's Mook's book on ethnobotany, and of course, I'm a vegetation specialist, so ethnobotany is of interest to me. And I'm just thrilled that readers enjoyed all that stuff, because I feel that all those little tidbits add a lot of uh, interest to the story, and also it's educational for Ukrainian readers for sure, and other readers. And of course, my background is in science and translating it to everyday application on the ground. So of course, I'm naturally kind of bent that way in my thinking.
How did you go about amassing the historical research that you needed to write Heartstones?
Well, I'd read basically anything I could get my hands on regarding Ukrainian history, like Myrna Kostash's books, one of which is called All of Baba's Children, in which she actually interviewed Ukrainian immigrants. That was really important. Baba's Kitchen Medicines, as I talked about, written by Michael Mooks. Blood and Salt, written by Saskatchewan author Brenda Saperja, is a novel about a Ukrainian experience in an internment camp in Canada. And so I read all of that stuff, but there's also some really oddball stuff that came my way. For example, one of my friend's mothers passed me a book on the Americans in World War One, and I thought I'd take a look at it, and oddly enough, inside I found maps of the front lines for all of the armies fighting in World War One. And shocking to me was that my ancestral village of Melnitsa Podilska was on the front line many times. I think 6 or 7 times during World War One. So um, that was shocking to me.
There are many interesting characters in your new book, Heartstones, one of which their name is Cost. Now, they go through some pretty interesting dilemmas in the book. Would you be able to give some more information on that character without spoiling anything?
Well, Cost is was a real person, and he's somebody that my grandmother met in war camps. Apparently, she was in about 9 war camps, and we don't really know that much about Cost, so I really made up his character. But the dilemma that the reader faces in the book is, um, can a person um, of the opposite sex have really altruistic aspirations to help another person who really needs it? Or do they have a vested interest in mind? So it's really looking at um, the kindness of strangers or the vested interest of strangers. When you're in this wartime experience, um, sometimes you need a hand, and you may find yourself in a really vulnerable position. So so what does the reader think of Cost and his actions? I think that's the dilemma.
So you're asking your readers to form their own conclusion about the character of Cost?
Well, readers have usually bring him up, and they have perhaps strong opinions about what happened or didn't happen, or they can't tell what happened, and they, based on their own experiences, they start to um, weave that into their understanding of the story. And I find that really interesting because, without really meaning to, the character of Cost that I created kind of turns into a linchpin in the story that grabs people.
It's very good. Suppose that's all the information we'll need. Of course, if people want to learn more about the character of Cost, they could read the book Heartstones, which will be available for purchase soon on platforms like Amazon. I would like to know, when did you start writing the book Heartstones?
I started thinking about the book probably in about 2016, after I'd written my family history document. And I thought, wow, there's a great story here. And I thought, oh, I'd love to write a novel as a lifetime accomplishment. But at the same time, I realized, oh my goodness, that is a really huge commitment. That's a really big project. I already knew from my writing experience that it was significant. And I thought, if I'm going to write a novel, the story has to be really compelling. It has to be able to hold me for the duration of that huge investment in time. And I decided that the story of my grandparents' 9 year separation really compelled me. And when um, we moved to Canmore 5 years ago, I joined a writing group, and that writing group I really kind of got me going. It got me going on weekly assignments, and I was part of a critique session, so I was accountable for that. And slowly, bit by bit, the novel started to form. And um, yeah, like, how do you eat an elephant? One spoon at a time. I've been working on this project for the last 5 years.
That does mean that this project did carry forth through the pandemic. Would you be able to tell me, did that worldwide event affect this project in any way?
Yeah, yeah, it did. I had joined a group called Writers on Fire, which is led by Nikki Tate here in Canmore, and she had started an online platform for writers, I think around 2018. But when COVID hit, that really became a lot more important. And we met weekly for critique sessions. And so we were required to bring 3 pages of our writing that could be critiqued by our partners. And we would do that every Thursday night. And so there was accountability in that. I needed to have some product available for others. And in so doing, I learned a lot more about writing and publishing and that kind of thing. So I would say that COVID kind of had a positive aspect on my writing because in the beginning days of COVID, we weren't really socializing at all outside our homes and that kind of thing. And so I had this wonderful group that I could see on my screen every week, and we were working on these creative pursuits together. So that was one positive element of COVID for me, for sure, that I had this time to work on this project, and I also had Writers on Fire group there to work with.
And speaking about the COVID-19 pandemic, a worldwide historically significant event, we move into what is another worldwide historically significant event in the war between Russia and Ukraine, which also happened in this book's creation, publication, and lifespan. How exactly did the war between Russia and Ukraine affect this book in writing, publication? How were you affected by that?
Well, I'd finished my draft manuscript a couple of months before the invasion happened, and I was shocked. I was really shocked. I'd been following kind of what was going on in Ukraine. I guess I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach, um, and I thought, "Oh my goodness, it's happening again." Just this thing that I've written about my grandparents' wartime experience. And the war camps and having to leave your village and living in this new reality. It's happening exactly again to Ukrainians who are fleeing to Poland and many other countries, including Canada. I think it's just a really bad thing to have happen, and I don't think it's good for everyday Russian people either.
You've had a long career in writing on behalf of a business, writing newsletters, and now writing your first book, Heartstones. And I'm wondering when the writing bug truly bit you. Did you always think that you would become a writer?
No, no. I Writing found me when I was working for PFRA, or the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, which is a branch of Agriculture Canada. There was a need for writing in our group, and I was a woman working in a non-traditional field at that time, and I thought there's an opportunity here for me. I can contribute. I'll give this a try and contribute this, and maybe that is a niche that I can perform in my profession, in my work group. And that's kind of exactly what happened. There was this need for writing in my subject matter expertise. And that's where it all started. And um, there's many different ways to write. There's technical writing, there's creative writing, there's poetry. I had to learn how to write dialogue and how to write fiction, and that's quite different from technical writing. Technical writing is more to the point and punchy. It's very very. It's not. It doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily highly descriptive. So um, people say that my novel reads really easily and for them, and I think that's because perhaps a bit because of my background as a technical writer. Get to the point and move on. So, um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
As a writer, do you have any rituals that you do when you are writing or preparing to write?
One of the things I learned in my professional life is when something needs to be written, just get it down on paper. It can be just garble. It it doesn't really it's not going to be correct. It's going to be really messy, and a lot of authors will talk about the crappy first draft. The first draft, expect it to be crappy. um, but just get something down, and then when you've got something down, you've got something to shoot at, and it all goes from there. But just get something down. So that's my I'd say my biggest writing ritual is, um, open the laptop, get it going, get 2 or 3 words down. And I tend to like to set a goal for myself to write for an hour. And um, often it becomes more than an hour.
What would you say is the most difficult part of writing? Is it the getting started part?
For me, it's not the getting started part. The editing process is really um, lengthy. I think I edited my own manuscript a bazillion times, and I had my writing group provide me feedback on it. And then, of course, in the later stages, professional editors became involved in editing. And um, the editing process for me is really exhaustive or exhausting, and I have a lot of admiration for somebody who can do a great job of editing something and still keeping the author's voice in it, not losing uh, what the author's voice intended to say.
To build on that a bit, what would you say is the most rewarding part of writing as an author?
The most rewarding part of writing for me is having readers kind of having them respond to my writing. Um, for example, I had a advanced reader in Florida who said to me, I got married in 1960, and my mother-in-law was Ukrainian, and she wouldn't talk about anything. We heard Ukrainian being spoken, we heard about um, customs and that kind of thing, but she would not talk about her experiences in World War I. And the family wouldn't ask her a lot of questions, and there were a lot of gaps for me. And she said that your book really helped me fill in some gaps for what her life was like. And to me, that's like, wow, that's so powerful that I helped you understand your own family's origins and the situations they were dealing with. That for me as a writer is so powerful. And this whole idea of trying to make history come alive and make it readable, because when I was doing historical research, I found it really mixed me up. Like, when did this happen? When did that happen? Why? How did these two events relate? And there was a lot going on during World War I, both in Canada and in Europe. And the process of writing the book, I would, in the draft, I would actually word process the key events, so then I'd know when to write about them or incorporate them in my story. And this really helped me understand the 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 order of events that happened in our history. And that's my hope for readers too, is that they can, through reading a book and enjoying a book, they can learn more about their own history, both in Canada and in Ukraine, present day Ukraine.
Speaking a bit more about you as an author, what tips would you provide to aspiring authors, perhaps looking to tackle similar themes or topics in their books?
I think one of the really important things that I did was to just join a writing group, especially where you could get your work critiqued and get feedback on it and learn more about writing. That to me was really critical. I couldn't have done this on my own, and I really believe that we don't do anything on our own of any importance. It always involves working with other people, getting advice from other people, helping them helping you. Getting involved with other writers was really critical.
This question belongs at the top of the interview segment, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you why the book was named Heartstones.
Oh, uh, I had picked out another name, and I googled it on I googled it and found out that many other people had used that name. So I thought, oh well, I can't use that. So in my writing group, I asked, what I have to change the name of my novel. I never expected this. What should my novel be, and what should it be called? And um, in the novel, I use I create a story where a young boy, and as his mother, Lilia, the one of the key characters, amulets are big in Ukrainian lore, and this young boy and his mother, they find heart-shaped stones along the Dniester River, and they're poor, so they give these heart-shaped stones to Mick, the character who was my grandfather, and they're gifts. They're gifts. Um, Take these shaped stones and remember us. And they put him in his bag the night before he leaves. So he finds them at a train station when he's in transit to Canada, and these heart shaped stones kind of follow the storyline, and it's just kind of a neat thing. So calling the book Heartstones was actually the idea of one of my fellow writers, because I had used it as a thread to carry the story.
Is there anything, wrapping up, is there anything you'd like to say to the readers and the reviewers, the fans of your book?
I really appreciate how generous people have been with their time to both read my book and provide a review. It's really allowed a nice connection to happen. And I just received an email this morning. There's a group in Manitoba that wants to do some writing, and they are wondering if I might give them some advice. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's a connection that I hadn't heard of. So I think I think my book is just gonna create all kinds of creative opportunities that I I haven't even dreamt of. So I want to be open to whatever comes out of this. And of course, my blog has been really fun to write, and I invite people to get involved in that too.
Where can readers, prospective purchasers of Heartstones, where can they find more information about you as an author?
Okay, I they can go to my website, which is www.christinenykoluk.com, and there's lots of information there where my book will be sold. And I've also started a blog. You can also go to my website and look at my blog page, and you can download chapter 1 of Heartstones free.
That's great. And speaking about your new book, Heartstones, which will be made available very, very soon, where can people go to purchase this book?
My book will be available through Friesen Press, which is, of course, a Canadian company. It'll be available through Amazon, and that's all the Amazon, I guess you'd say, all the Amazons in the world, because they're different. I learned it'll be available on indigo.com or Indigo in chapters. And you can also order it through your local bookstore. There's a buy local button on my website, and this button will take you to the locations of stores near you that you can order it through. So, and there's also a lot of ebook formats that are listed on my website as well. So there's a huge variety of ways to access the story.